Hello, everybody, and welcome to this interview with Caro Brookings, who is the suicide bereavement coach and is somebody that's become a really great friend of mine. And we are here today to talk about her book, which she's just written called Hope, Rewiring Your Brain After Suicide Loss. So, welcome, Caro.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to having this chat with you. And for those of you who haven't seen it, this is the book, and maybe if we've got time later, I can talk a bit about the cover because every element was carefully chosen.
Yes, I would love to hear about that. And I would love to, first of all, just congratulate you on getting the book done because it's a huge undertaking. And I know that you are a busy woman with children and a husband and other jobs. So I really admire you for getting it done in a short space of time. How does it feel now it's out in the world?
Yeah, well, thank you firstly for your kind words and thank you for what you've done because you've written your book, you've published it, you put it out there, and that's what really inspired me to write my book because it was never on my radar to write a book. Maybe someday, but I didn't know if someday would ever come. So thank you for that. But it feels really great. It's starting to sink in a little bit more, and it's still a bit unbelievable that I've written a proper book that's out there and it looks great and people can buy it and it's out in a couple of like physical bookstores already, especially locally around me, and kind of to go in that store and see my book on the shelf next to other amazing books. It's just it feels good. And then of course it's available on Amazon as well, so people can get it from worldwide, and just people getting in touch and telling me how much it has helped them. It warms my heart. And one of the ideas of writing the book is all the work that I've done over the past few years and the experiences I've had. I wanted to put that together into the book so it's accessible for everyone, and anyone who'd like to know more, they can just read it and get all the information and the tools. So I think that's working out very well.
Yeah, I think so too. And we're recording this actually on the 23rd of November, 2025. And this is a pretty significant week. So would you like to share with the listeners why that is?
Yeah, so yesterday, November 22nd, 2025 was my mum's 12th anniversary. Um, and I think still to this day, it's been more than a decade. I still kind of think back about the days leading up to her suicide and kind of the days after. They get so etched into our minds. So we know exactly what we did on each day, what we were wearing and all of that. So, November 20th was the um anniversary, I guess, of me having my last actual conversation with her. Um, Yesterday was her anniversary. Today, 12 years ago, was when I found out. Tomorrow, 12 years ago, was the last time I kind of saw her. So they managed to resuscitate her, and she was in the ICU, but she wasn't responsive. But I got to see her. And then on the 25th is when she kind of officially died. And then, the whole aftermath of being with my family in Germany, and it trying to make sense of what happened, things that you can't even make sense of, and in the midst, arranging a funeral and supporting other family members, and it was very intense. So that kind of keeps coming back up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have decided to write a book. You've also become a coach because of the suicide of your mom. And the book, I feel, has got so much great information in it. And One of the things that really struck me, and it strikes me a lot also in the work that I do, is that you realize that you had to forgive yourself, forgive your mum, and process your grief. And I know that you did find some support in the beginning, but it wasn't kind of giving you the support or the help that you needed. And I know that in chapter 7, for example, you really start to get into the strategy of the of how you really started to process your grief around suicide, loss in particular. I mean, yeah, maybe to begin with, we could talk about the complexity, of suicide grief and how our brains really struggle with this in particular.
Yeah. So, like you said, initially I tried a few different ways to help myself, but nothing really worked. So I was in my last year of university and I went to see my local university counselor, but I felt, even thinking back, it was just like me talking, and it was a strange situation looking back because it was never like I broke down crying in front of her. I broke down crying, in bed at night, but never while I was talking to her about it. And it must still have been that shock and the wall up and everything like that. But basically, I saw her every week for a while and kind of, just talked about what had happened, and she would listen and she wouldn't say anything. So I was like, oh, this is so awkward. So I'd just say some more, and then the hour was over. And that went on for a few weeks. And then she went on maternity leave and she just said, well, you seem all right. You don't need to come back. So that was kind of that. And then, so like you said, my mum died in late November. So then about a month later, I saw my local GP in the UK and kind of told her about my struggles. And at least she gave me some resources and some leaflets and things like that. And there was one about SOBs, survivors of bereavement by suicide, who's a peer support group all over the UK. And I started to email one of the volunteers of the place closest to me, and because I was worried what it would do to me going to one of those groups, if it would help me or if it would make things a million times worse. And her response, which I also mentioned in the book, was, well, she said, I can't tell you because everyone's different. So it took me until mid-March to kind of build up my courage and go to the support group. And honestly, the first time I was there with the people who were there, the volunteers, it was really cathartic. And, we got to listen to other people's stories. And then I got to tell my story. And yeah, it was just such a cathartic experience. And then I think they met once a month. So then the following month they opened a group closer to home, so I didn't have to drive an hour each way. And I went, but I didn't kind of resonate with the volunteers there and with the people there. And when it came round to me telling my story, I wasn't feeling it. Like I shared it, but I was like, this is not doing anything for me. So I never went back, right? So there's things you try, but in the end, nothing's really helping. And then when my first daughter was born, which was a few years later, I was kind of reminded, okay, I need to do something about this because it's not just me anymore, it's her as well. And, with my mum's mum being treated for depression and my mum taking her life, and then I'd been thinking, what about me? But now what about her? So I started looking online, and again, there's so much stuff out there, and nothing really resonated with me. It just seemed like some framework someone came up with, but which, if it works for one person, doesn't mean it's going to work for anyone. But then I learned about the rewiring of the brain and how it's all brain based and science backed. And, I went to university to study maths. I like the whole logical science kind of thing. So I took the course and used it on myself, and it made such a difference, especially like you said about, forgiving myself, letting go of that guilt, forgiving my mom, having those realizations. And then when they offered like an additional, longer, more intensive course where they said, well, you can learn how to now help other people. Now you've helped yourself. And I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm on. I still, it wasn't easy to put myself out there at first, I must admit, but I had a coach and I rewired my brain around that. So it was the start of something really beautiful.
And that is all explained in your book. And so for people who, might feel cautious about joining a group or, signing up if cost was an issue, the amazing thing is you've put all of this information into your book for people if they want to um, try it for themselves. But I also know people that have worked with you um, and also someone like myself who really believes in the power of the group and working with other people. I think you can read the book and then you might want to also, join one of your coaching programs, which is so powerful and being in community. So it's great that you've got the, both things to offer people now. Um,
Hmm.
Yeah, and I know that you give very specific tools as well for people to work on, like, writing letters or, I don't know if anything comes to you right now that you might want to share with people about specific ways that they can process.
Yeah. So, I mean, the rewiring of the brain, like you said, is explained in detail in chapter 7, and there's kind of steps that you go through, and it's all explained there, and you'll be able to make some headway on your own. But I always find it helps for someone else to look through it because it's very nuanced on what words we might want to use or not use or how we want to set these things up. Because when we talk rewiring of the brain, you can rewire your brain in all kinds of different ways, positive ways and negative ways. So we want to make sure we set it up well so we actually rewire our brain in the way that we're intending it to. So I would encourage people, if they've gone through the book and they've come up with some statements, and at the end of each chapter there's some hope and practice questions that people can do. Once they've done that, and if they've got questions, they're welcome to get in touch with me and we can kind of fine tune some of those things. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's also a toolbox at the end of the book, and I decided to kind of keep it neatly in one place rather than sprinkle it all around because sometimes we struggle and we just need something that is easily accessible. And the way I see it is always, having a menu to choose from. So there's a number of different tools there. Not everything will fit everyone or resonate with everyone. So I always say, try it. If you like it, great. If not, try something else. Um, so the letter writing is a really great exercise because you can do it in a number of ways. So you could write a letter to your loved one, tell them things that you didn't get to tell them, especially, when you lose them to suicide. There's so many things that are left untold. You could get your loved one to write a letter to you, kind of, it could be their final letter or a letter answering some of the unanswered questions. And some people might say to me, well, I don't know what to write, or, is it really from them? But I always say you've got this really close relationship with them generally, and you had in life and you still have now. So you kind of know what they'd want to say to you anyway, so you can get that down. And another way to write letters, if there's people that you're angry with for one reason or another, maybe you believe that they in some way contributed to your loved one's suicide, or there's lots of different reasons. The angry letter, as you like to call them. Some people call them hate letters, and I'm like, okay, let's not take it that far. But it's just really helpful because we write that letter to that person we're angry with. And I always say to my clients, be raw and real. Don't sugarcoat it. Just write it down as it is, as you feel it, because no one else is going to read it. They don't have to share with me. It's just for them. And that really helps to process everything that's going on. And then at the end, I always say, I recommend don't send it. But people have different ways. Some people want to just hide it somewhere and read it another time, or they might burn it, rip it up. I've had people tying it to a balloon and letting the balloon go. But that's one of my favorite exercises. And then it's all about, breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises, all these different kinds of things.
Thank you for sharing that. And as you know, I'm a huge advocate for, writing. So that's definitely something I've always found very helpful personally. I feel like it would be, one of the chapters that was very interesting for me was, the stigma around suicide loss and the history around I mean, you're going to be able to word this a lot better than me, but obviously in the church, and then not even being able to bury people who died by suicide, and understanding like why culturally it's been so difficult for us to talk about, as if like death and grief isn't difficult enough, and then talking about a
Mhm.
loss by suicide. So, is there anything that you'd like to share with the listeners in particular about that?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. And like you say, there's a whole chapter about the misconceptions and kind of busting those myths. And like you mentioned, it kind of that's what it goes back to the church and how people weren't allowed to be buried on the church ground, which made it, like you said, even more difficult for those who were grieving and more shameful. Luckily and thankfully, that has changed over the years. And one of the people I've interviewed before, and I've quoted in the book as well, Father Ron Rollheiser, who's a Catholic priest who does so much about suicide loss through his writings and interviews, and he's spreading the word. But yeah, it's kind of a number of different things. Other people don't know what to say, so they say nothing, or they don't want to say the wrong thing, or then they end up saying something which is hurtful. Um, and like I find it heartbreaking because one of my clients who's experienced that, she lost her son to suicide, and at his school they hardly even talk about him or mention him. They did like one small thing to remember him, but nothing else really. And recently, one of his friends wasn't allowed to actually talk about her son. They told him not to, and she said, if it'd been an accident or cancer or anything else, they would have fundraised and done all of these different things. So it's very disappointing. I think we're moving in the right direction. Um, and one of the ways that we can help is when we're ready to share our story. And I always say, you know when you're ready, and I never would want to push anyone to share when they're not ready. Um, I don't know how you find it, but I find when people look at me, we're over a decade down the road, you even more so than me, and they see what we do, but I say to them, for the first 2 years, that's not what I did. I just tried to get by and didn't really talk about my mom's suicide to many people. So it can change over time and as we process our grief. And sometimes we can think, well, we're just a drop in the ocean, right? what is me sharing my story with someone at the supermarket gonna do? But there's definitely this ripple effect where, they might know someone. Sometimes we share our story and we didn't even know that they've lost someone to suicide. And I've had that as well. There were people I worked with for many years, and one of them lost his mom to suicide, and I had no idea until I kind of opened up around that. But I think that's a really important step where we can collectively bust these misconceptions. And my hope is not just that, we can talk about it more and get more understanding and comfort as suicide loss survivors, but if we can talk about it more in general, then maybe we can work on that mental health stigma as well, so that people who are struggling, if they're able to, can reach out and don't feel that shame attached to it.
Yeah, and you have got so much amazing information, about the myths and misconceptions and even the chapter around what suicide attempts survivors want us to know. There's so much great information in the book. And you mention the word hope just now. So that's the name of the book. And I wanted to also just talk about the quote that you put in the first page, because I love it so much, the Desmond Tutu quote. Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness, and I feel like that's such a quote that we need to live by right now, just in the world that we're living in. But tell us about the title and the front cover, because I would love to know.
Yeah, I'd love to share. So like you said, it's called Hope, Rewiring Your Brain Around Suicide Loss. So when I thought about what to call it, I had, lots of different ideas. And then of course the publisher gives us some suggestions or restrictions to work on. And I kind of put some ideas out, and I really like the hope because, they also say hope dies last is kind of that thing that even when everything else kind of falls apart, we still somewhere deep inside, even if we can't get to it or even see it at that point, there's that little bit of hope, that we'll be able to get through this. And then I kind of shared with my community, and the hope really resonated with them. They said, if I saw that out there, hope, that's what I want, hope. So it really stuck. And then the rewiring your brain after suicide loss. I was playing around with different um, subtitles. And first I thought about embracing life after suicide loss, because I've basically put everything that I have in my head into that book. I really struggled to kind of summarize that into a title and a subtitle because, yes, the rewiring of the brain is a big part, but there's so many other things I talk about. Like you mentioned, suicide attempt survivors, research about the brain and how it can get sick. But in the end, I thought, well, you get all that as well, but I haven't really seen many or any books out there who talk about rewiring of the brain in terms of grief and suicide loss. So that's how kind of it came about. And then let me see if I can hold this up. So the cover,
Hmm.
um, I'm really happy with how it turned out, especially since I I am someone who needs to see something to kind of know where to go from here. So when the cover artist said, "Oh, just give us some ideas," I was like, "Oh gosh, where do I start?" So actually, after trying a few things, I sent them. For those of you who don't know, I've got like a whole sleeve with tattoos of things that remind me of my mom. So I kind of sent them the pictures of that and say, okay, what can you do with this? I want to incorporate as many as possible. And they were like, okay, well, we don't want, want to clutter it too much. So there were a few rounds of changes, but so we've got the rainbow here. The rainbow is because when there was a rainbow outside when I was a kid, my mom would always stand by the window and watch the rainbow. And there was this joke, so even if it was supper time and I was really hungry, and my mom would always make supper for me. And she would just stand there looking at the rainbow, and I would just say to her, I'm starving to death here. Please make my supper. And she would just wait until the rainbow was gone. So that's a nice, funny memory I have. Um, then kind of you can see the woman pushing the bike. So we found some kind of stock images and I asked them to change it to make it look like my mom, like she had the gray hair, for example, and the bike is red because she used to cycle everywhere. She never really liked driving, so she had her red bike and she would cycle to work, which wasn't too far away. So that's kind of an image I have of her, cycling or pushing that bike. And then you can see on the sides the rose bushes. And my mum loved roses. It was her favorite flower, and in in their garden they've had lots of rose bushes and still do. And then one of the kind of sad things really is that she died a couple of months after her 50th birthday. So for her 50th birthday, she got some rose bushes, but she also asked for like vouchers, gift cards to local garden centers so she could go and pick rose bushes and um they could plant a lot more. And they got a few, but they never really got round to getting all of them. So I still remember my dad having some left over and us kind of me and him going to the garden centers to pick some out. So that was very, very poignant, very sad. So, and he was saying like how now he can only cut off some roses and kind of bring them to the cemetery. It's very different, but um having that rose garden is still a nice memory of her. And then, kind of to sum it up, the whole scene. So you've got the rainbow, you've got the rose bushes, you've got the woman pushing the bike, and that's kind of my vision of her, pushing her bike and walking through heaven, just no cares in the world, just this nice weather with all the things that she loves. So that's kind of my vision of that. So I'm very happy how it turned out. And then, of course, the hope up here in a bold purple. So, yeah, I'm really pleased with it.
Well, it looks amazing, and it's
Yeah,
really powerful to have you explain all of those details to us and the personalization of it. So thank you for that, Caro.
thank you.
So anything else that you would like to share before we conclude?
Yeah, so there's just one thing I kind of wanted to bring up because I only found out about it a few years ago, and that yesterday, November 22nd, was actually International Suicide Loss Survivors Day, and it always falls on the Saturday before the American Thanksgiving. And I think it's really important that we've got such a day because, of course, September 10th, we've got the Suicide Prevention or Suicide Awareness Day, which is really important too. And it deals a bit more of like the mental health side of things and recognizing the science, which uh, I'm not too easy about because it makes it so black and white, which of course it isn't. But I just think it's great that there's a day for us, right, as suicide loss survivors who are left behind because it is such a big struggle and it does get so lonely if we can't find our people. Um, so it's good to raise that awareness and let other people know, not just us, but in the general population that there is such a day and why it's the case. And maybe again, get that courage to share some of our stories, share some of our journeys, get together and know that we're not alone and um, know that we're here to support each other. And of course, we struggle with our suicide loss every day. So, it's not just, oh, it's this one day of the year and then we kind of move on. But I still think it's nice to have that day just to bring the awareness and who knows what can come from it, but then continue this work and supporting each other throughout the year.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that. And actually, that was another um, you have those statistics of the number of people who die by suicide, and then you said, and then it says for each person who dies by suicide, obviously approximately 135 people will be
Hmm.
impacted by that one person's death, which
Yeah,
is, I often think about that the older that I get, because sometimes, it's your mum that died by suicide, or it was my mum that died of breast cancer, and we often think about our grief and only our grief, and our, their deaths affect so many other people, far and wide, that people that maybe we never knew or never realized, had missed them and grieved them in a deep way. And I think, as you say, like having that awareness about the people who survive the suicide loss is really, really powerful.
yeah, for sure. And I've noticed that as well. Like yesterday, I put a little status on my WhatsApp with a picture of my mom, and some of my further out relatives that I wouldn't talk to all the time, but they send a little message so I can see, they're still thinking about my mom and me. And even after my mom's funeral, when my dad and I go back to his house, my childhood home, and we had this big leather folder with all the cards in there, and we were looking through them, and there were quite a few people we didn't even know who they were, like maybe childhood friends or whatever. So it really goes to show, like you say, we don't realize. And as the statistics goes, and that's one of the things I want to raise awareness about as well. And it's kind of, the back of the book blurb talks about this. So worldwide, we say around one person takes their life every 40 seconds. So if one person, there's 135 people affected by that person's suicide, discounting the double counting, whatever, just very simplistic. That means every 40 seconds worldwide, we've got another 135 suicide loss survivors, right? And then it's around 700,000 suicide worldwide per year times 135, right? You can get out the calculator and do the math, but that's a lot of suicide loss survivors. So I always say, why is there still such stigma around it when there's so many of us out there and affected by it? So again, it's important to put the resources out there, the tools out there, so people who might be too worried to open up about their experience, they still can get help. And then I definitely believe in that ripple effect.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you. And again, congratulations, Caro. It's a real gift that you've put out into the world. And as you mentioned, it's available on Amazon and coming to more bookstores. So yeah. So good to see you, and thank you to everybody who's been listening. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye.